is now live. Bento Bureau.
Itadakimasu! Okay. Welcome back to Bento Bureau, a place where we talk about life in Japan through an international perspective with a side dish of socio-political discussion. So, we recently took a short hiatus before making this episode as we made our way through completing our research papers for the end of our university semester. It also helped us to take, a little while to contemplate on the direction of the show. If you've been sticking around with us lately, you'd know our first few episodes have been, in a sense, experimental, to say the least, as we try to find ways to improve upon the show. Thank you very much, by the way, if you've been listening up to this point. And also, thank you for giving us a shot if it's your first time. We're glad to have you.
Yeah, thank you very much.
Yeah, gentlemen, how are you?
I'm good.
Yeah, very good.
We're doing well.
Yeah.
Joined with me today is Bastian Harth.
Hello.
From Germany, but he's currently studying in Paris for the summer holiday.
Bonjour, madame et messieurs.
Yeah. And
Baguette.
we also got Jess Hartman from Guam.
Hello, my name is Jess Hartman.
And we also got, last but not least, Woradon Yomujinda, also known as Ichi.
My name is Ichi.
From Thailand.
Hello, everyone.
So how's your summer vacations, guys? What have you guys been up to?
Well, I recently moved into the dormitory since Thursday. I'm trying to kind of adjust my life here. Been buying a lot of groceries. Living by myself requires a lot more planning than I thought.
Yeah, because you've been living with your family, like in Hiratsuka
Yeah.
Prefecture.
Yeah. Kanagawa Prefecture.
Hotel Mama.
Yeah.
What is that? I don't understand the reference.
Well,
Isn't it the Eddie Murphy movie?
Oh,
You don't
I
know
haven't watched
Hotel
that
Mama?
movie.
that's basically
Sorry.
it means like when somebody moves out, they realize, okay, now I'm getting busy, I have to do this, I have to do that. But before it was kind of like a hotel. Your mom did everything for you. That's kind of like
I
the
see.
reference.
What about you, Ichi? How have you been doing?
Well, I have been doing an internship at the Royal Thai Embassy.
Oh.
It has been a great experience.
How's that going?
Thai Embassy.
It is indeed the Royal Thai Embassy, the full name it is.
In Japan, of course.
It's great. I got, in Tokyo, Meguro Station.
And how's that?
It's great. I mean, I have been drafting a letter for the ambassador. I have been arranging the schedule of the upcoming meeting between the ASEAN ambassador in Japan. I also have been doing the schedule for the student of JICA, drafting some speech and stuff. I mean, I am consider the chain of commands that I'm at the lowest level, but they take care of me well.
What exactly
And
do you do?
they
Do you
give me-
go and translate things into Japanese or what?
Well, I do all kinds of things. I translate things from Japanese to Thai, from English to Thai, from Thai to Japanese, from Thai to English.
Interesting.
Yeah.
I also have
Wow.
been basically drafting a letter for the ambassador to sign. So I have been to basically relearning my Thai because there's just similar to Japanese, there's a level of language. At this level is the official level, and there's more casual language. So yeah.
I guess you've been
So
pretty
great,
busy,
they
huh?
Yeah, I work from 9 to 5:30 every
Yeah.
day.
I'm back home in Qatar, just spending time with the family, I guess. It's going great.
Mm-hmm.
Bastian, like I
Really?
said,
Do you have
was
any- Do you have any new members of the family?
No, no new members. I know I live in an extended family, but yeah, no new. No, I think we're taking a hiatus for now.
New members.
We just saw your cat. What is with that?
Yeah, that was the person I was kind of referring to. I've never seen your cat before.
Oh yes. Oh yeah. He is the new member of the family. He's a cute cat. But yeah, enough about my cat. Bastion.
What's his name?
Yeah, that's
His
what I wanna
name's.
know too.
It's a she actually.
Oh.
Okay, what's her name?
BB.
BB.
Aww.
What a lame name.
Listen, I didn't give it the name. Okay, let's
What does it mean?
move on. Okay, let's move on. Let's not talk about my cat. No more discussion about cats. If you want to talk about
Okay.
cats, go to YouTube and search Catterday or something.
Okay.
Anyway, yeah. So Bastion's been going on an endeavor in Paris, as we mentioned earlier, trying to get his French up and running. How's that going?
Well, I just arrived yesterday evening, quite late.
Do you know how to speak
they've-
French now?
Yeah, yeah. Of course.
Give us a sentence.
Parlez-vous français? Nee.
Okay.
Which translates to
Yeah, right.
Which
No,
translates to let's get on with the show. All right, how about we get down to it? Today we're
Sure.
going to be discussing about the research papers we wrote this semester. They're all focused on Japanese society, so there's a lot to cover. We'll try to go through everything in suitable fashion, but we thought it would be an interesting idea to get this going and make it more in-depth compared to the other episodes we've done so far. So, who wants to start?
Somebody in Japan.
Somebody in Japan.
Somebody in
I
Japan?
nominate Ichi.
Okay, I can go first.
Go ahead, Ichi.
Tell us about your paper.
So basically my paper is about the effects of the elderly care in Japan. So as we know, Japan has an aging society. A quarter of the Japanese population right now is over 60 years old, so 65 years, so that is considered the elderly. So elderly care is extremely important in order to keep this society running, but I found that there is an insufficient and ineffective elderly care, and that is causing a problem for both women in workplace and the elderly, and also the care worker in general.
Can you be more specific about that? What's the insufficiencies you go through in your paper?
Well, my paper is mostly focused on the effect rather than the cause, but yeah, I do go to the cause a bit briefly. So basically, right now, when we talk about elderly care, we mean two main things. The nursing homes, which is where you like send your parent to stay after they get old so they can be with their own community. And because you are very busy at work and you do not have enough time to take care of them. And there is also a home health care, which basically there will be a worker who come and take care of your parents in your home. So the problem about nursing care is that there are not enough nursing homes in Japan. And there is also an issue of basically not enough staff, because the staff has a comparatively very low salary compared to people in the same field, like the nurse in the hospital or the other healthcare worker. So you got a problem about that. And when it comes to the home healthcare, basically the staff are having a very intense schedule, because back in early 2000s, Japan has a different system of the insurance. Back then it was not privatized and there was another system, but then the Japanese government have to change the system in order to make it more available to other people. But the issue is that the care worker themselves, they now have to spend fewer time for each patient. Before they might get to spend an hours with the patient, they get to talk to them, know them more. they get to cook them food, but now they just come in, massage them, take them for a walk, take care of their back, checking out them for like 30 minutes, and they have to keep on moving and moving to another home. So the care quality is not as good as before. So this is another problem.
So
So this is like the cost.
sorry, Ichi, go ahead.
Yeah. That's basically the cost. I did not like dive too deep into that because I am more interested in the effect of the inefficient and the ineffective elderly care in Japan.
So what are the
This is-
effects?
Well, the first thing is, as we know, the Japanese women, they already bear disproportionate burden of caring for both the children and the elderly in their family.
Is it primarily
And it is
women
n-
who work in these occupations?
It is primarily women who work in this occupation. So you also have the issue of the women who got like lower salary than men in general. But yeah, when it comes to the women, because they have to care for both, it is not even their parents, it is the parents of their husband and their children. So this is called the double care. Approximately right now, according to the official statistics, is 170,000 women who are in this, who are having to do the double care.
How many
But
are
still,
men?
this, how many are men? Well, I do not have the statistic with me right now,
I see.
but far fewer.
All right.
But of course, this number is not even that accurate because it's only for women who are taking care of the pre-nursery children. So even if your children are in primary school, it's not counted in this statistic. So the real number is probably around 500,000. So you got the issue of this. Women have to take care of the elderly because the system is not sufficient. So they cannot turn them in. They cannot become a workforce for Japan. Or even if they do work, they have to work in a part-time job. So that's a big issue.
Wait, so you said that most of them are women, right?
Most of them
You
are
also were
women.
talking about part-time jobs. I was wondering, how is it with childcare leave in that branch, basically?
Which branch? are you-
Like of elderly care, since most of them are women, they must take care of children, as you said, or their own children as well, as you said. How is it when they're with the childcare leave? How do they manage that?
the child care
Yeah, I
leave?
was just
Well, I'm pretty sure that like most other jobs for women, that if they do take the maternity leave, then their career path isn't going to go so well when they come back. So maybe the women who work in the elderly care, they prefer not to
maybe
have
maybe I
children.
didn't phrase
it
it
could
correctly.
be-
What I mean is, are the women basically who took childcare leave? Who took childcare leave, and then they want to go back to their job? Are those women the ones who are working in that elderly care, or are those women who basically are, let's say, they're in their 20s and they start their career in the elderly care, and they just go on in their lives and do the job? Or are those women who basically had their own childs, who are not able to get into a normal job anymore, and then started to do this elderly care as their full-time employment or part-time employment? That's what I was wondering about.
That is a good question. I do not focus on that aspect because my sources are basically interviews with around a dozen care workers. They do not discuss like their home, the family, so I do not know if they have children or not. But yeah, most of them have been working in this occupation for decades. So it's not like they are changing job or anything.
So they're not part-time jobbers, they are full-time jobbers.
It is a full-time job. Basically, you work. Basically, you have a timetable that you have to take care of this and this and this patients, and you have to work according to that schedule.
All right.
Okay. I don't suppose you conducted those interviews personally, did you?
Yes, I cited it from other researchers.
I see. In what was it based in a specific area of Japan?
It is not a specific area. It's just a healthcare in general. But yes, the researcher herself, she does not specify where the interviewee come from. She mostly just focus because the purpose of her research is to compare the elderly care before the introduction of the new long-term insurance care law and the after.
I see.
So she conduct the interview with the workers who have been working in this field for a long time. They have experience both before and after this law is introduced.
Okay. Would you see different levels of quality in terms of the healthcare service in the country before this law was implemented, or?
So basically, according to research I found, the quality of the life of the woman who, after this law is implemented, the women do get they do feel less burden from having to take care of the elderly in their home, but they still feel there's a problem and it is still not enough.
Interesting.
Is it just it's because that there is a lack of, or it's an insufficient number of employees in the elderly care workforce, correct?
Yes, there are many factors, but that is definitely a big one.
Is the government addressing this issue? Are they trying to do something about it?
No, they are actually trying to cut the elderly care cost.
Really?
Since the introduction of this law, the government actually has been spent more and more budget into the elderly care, and this is not sustainable, especially with the Japan economy in recession as it is now. They need a big reconstruction of the whole, a big reform into to tackle this problem.
What do you think is the right way to do things, or to kind of sort through this issue?
I don't know. I don't even know myself. I actually got to attend lecture from the economists who work in the Japan Central Bank for decades, and even he himself said, "I also don't know how to fix this problem because it's such a huge structural problem, and Abenomics is not working. So I guess we will see in the future. They have to figure some things out."
I see.
Knowing and fixing is always something completely different, right?
Yeah.
Okay, well, let's try talking about someone else's topic. Anyone else want to volunteer?
Yeah.
Well, why don't you go ahead, Jess?
Okay, sure. So I wrote this paper about a year ago. My paper was about the sexuality education in Japan, or the general curriculum that it offers. So it happened around 1990s, where there was actually a recent increase in the number of people who acquired sexually transmitted diseases. So the government tried to kind of implement kind of a compulsory education about the sexuality education, and unfortunately, how it's implemented, it depends on the schools themselves. There have been random statistics on how much time is put into teaching the subject. Usually it could be from either 3 hours in one semester to like 45 minutes a day. It really totally depends on the institutions themselves, and because of that, even around 2005, I believe, the Ministry of Health, Labor and Welfare, was it the STD Central Surveillance Study Group, they said that there's still an increasing tendency of people who engage in sexual activity in their early years in Japan, including today, which is why there's still an increase of STDs. They also mentioned
How early are we talking
usually so they will usually in their last years of middle school to their first or second year in high schools.
That's not too bad.
about?
Well, yeah. Well, ironically, the teenage pregnancy rate of Japan is still quite low. That's pretty apparent. That's pretty apparent with the declining birth rate and everything. But I guess the number of sexually transmitted diseases that's spreading is increasing quite well, frequently.
But couldn't contraception help?
Apparently, they don't really teach that much about contraceptions. They said they teach that condoms do help prevent pregnancy, but they don't really teach how to use the contraception. As for birth controls, I didn't really pick up any articles on how they described or how they taught the use of birth control pills.
Okay, so
I see.
so you say that.
So you don't know anything about how accessible contraception pills are in Japan in comparison to the United States?
No, not really.
Okay, Jess. So
Ichi, don't you know anything about that?
what? About what?
About the access to contraception pills in Japan.
I don't know.
How
I
easy
have
is it?
no contraception pill is going to be a very tough thing because you need a doctor to prescribe you for it.
In Japan?
Yeah, in Japan you need a doctor to, like morning
Yes.
pill. Like in the US you can
Yeah.
get it, but in Japan you need to go to a clinic to get it.
I can tell you how it is. So, based on my girlfriend's experience, I mean, they have birth control pills here in Japan. However, the variety of, especially Western birth control pills, it's not as big, so they don't have many. Another thing is, as Ichi said, you need a prescription from the doctor.
Mhm.
And a lot of Japanese tend to not have a birth control pill. They go to the gynecologist, however, they don't let them prescribe birth control pills in general because it's just seen as a controversial topic, or they're too shy.
Mhm.
They just don't want to talk about those things. And therefore, it became in the end as well very difficult for my girlfriend, for example, to get her birth control pills.
Mhm.
But that's how it is in Japan, for example.
Well, I was reading once, I think a while ago, I was reading on the topic of these sexual taboos such as abortion and the general consensus in terms of Japanese people. And I think I was reading an article once about how the Western influence, prior to the Western influence imposed on Japan during post World War II years, the consensus on many sexual acts or activities or any issues such as abortion were much more lenient in comparison to when they got General MacArthur to come and start imposing democracy.
That's so weird because, remember, as I said, that the government tried to implement these compulsory sexual education aspects into the curriculum. There was actually a bit of backlash in 2002 when they said it was considered excessive sex education. Like they wanted the teachers to be more as objective about it as possible, and by that I meant that they kind of just teach you the effects of these contraceptions or the stages of menstruation, those types of things, but not really I guess how to put it in use, I suppose. Yeah. And it's mostly privatized, I would say. It really just depends on how much the teacher wants to, how much information the teacher wants to give to the students. And sexual education is not really a topic in the entrance exams for high schools or universities. So most teachers would tend to just shrug it off or just kind of avoid teaching the topic as much as possible.
Why do you think that is?
Oh, go ahead.
Why do you think? I think you should explain the emphasis on entrance exams in Japan to people who may not know why they would ignore something if it wasn't on the entrance exam.
Well, if I had to explain entrance exams, it's not going to be from research. It's going to be from what I think. But, my Japanese mom, when she took her entrance exam, she said that she didn't really study that much, and because of that, she didn't get into the high school that she wanted to. And then my grandparents, basically her parents, they were pretty frustrated with that. It was kind of a very high, how do I say it, a high focus or concentration on what high school you entered. That's kind of like your social status already. And my mom to this day still regrets not really studying so much for her entrance exam. And I can see that even with my siblings right now, when they attend, my brother who studied for his high school exam, it was very important because he had to study like every day for a month before he had to take the actual exam. And my sister right now, she's in summer break, and the entrance exam is not for another 3 months or so, and she's still studying right now, just so she can get into the high school that she wants to. So I would say that the importance of entrance exams in high school are very important, as you can see in the curriculums themselves. If there are teachers who teach a subject that's probably not going to be on the exam, they would try and teach it as little as possible to focus more on the majority of the content that would be shown in the entrance exams.
Now I'm curious. How is it in Japan? Which subject do they learn about, like sexual education? Is it like its own subject, or is it included in biology?
It's included in health class.
Health class.
There's no specific subject or course just specifically for sexual education. It's usually applied in health class.
That's interesting. Even in Germany's case, for example, in general, it is in biology. So in our biology subject classes, we talk about sex education in general because it has to do with something with the body. So we talk about it. Okay, just wanted to know. All right, sounds like a good topic. Cool.
Yeah.
Well, Buzz, why don't you go ahead?
So my topic is focusing on the English education system in Japan, not the sex education system. Okay.
Darn.
Not the sex education system, Jess.
Not the English sex education system.
So,
No.
let me ask you a question, guys. What do you guys think of Japanese people, the general average English speaker in Japan?
Well, they can do a self-introduction. That's pretty much it.
They are general
For a
speakers.
developed nation is pretty underwhelming.
Yeah, like they can say what they like and their name. That's
All
it.
right. So, just to clarify, there are English speakers in Japan, but the fact of the matter is that the average speaking level in Japan in terms of English continues, and in terms of any other foreign language, it continues to be very, very low in consideration of the entire population. And this is an issue because the Japanese authority, the government, has been trying to fix this problem for decades. Like, they've been trying to actually implement English education properly so that there would be more English speakers since around a century. It goes back to it can go back centuries, as far as the 1600s, when Tokugawa Ieyasu.
Yeah.
He was a famous warlord of Japan. So it can go back to English education back there. He had encounters with European travelers. But in terms of when it properly started, the true boom of the English education really began to take root in the late 18th century, after Commodore Perry, a ship from the west, undocked its ship onto the shores of Japan and essentially opened the borders of Japan to the rest of the world. That's when a new administration took over, and it was the first time Japan saw unification in authority under the Meiji government. Before then, it was a feudalistic era with all the Tokugawa Bokufu. I'm sure our history master here, Waradon Yumijinda Ichi, can tell you all about it.
Yeah.
But so after being amazed by the innovation and advancement displayed by the West, the Meiji administration were quick to revise their education system, and they actually established a new Ministry of Education in 1871, which led to becoming later on the Monbu Gakusho, which has an extremely long name in English. It's like Ministry of Education, Technology, Sports. It just goes on and on and on.
Just everything mixed, yeah.
Yeah, it goes on until the end of this podcast. So let's just call it the Monbugakusho. So the Monbugakusho, ever since the Meiji era, they've been trying to put emphasis on national examinations for English. This is known in Japanese as Juken Eigo. Juken Eigo. So essentially, ever since this time, the early 19th century, this emphasis on Juken Eigo is perhaps the most important characteristic of English education in Japan. This is the essence of English education being taught in Japan. It's all about preparation for national examinations. As Jess spoke about earlier, in terms of the lack of sexual education in national exams for high schools, the emphasis on national exams for placed on students is extremely high in Japan due to the hierarchical, sort of meritocracy of education in the country, where the belief is that if you study hard, you'll get into a good school. Study hard, you get into a good university, and if you work hard, you get a good career path. So, with that in mind, that is pretty much English. That is pretty much the nature of how English education is ever since the early 19th century with Juken Eigo. So, all English education, the way they're taught in school, is essentially for preparation for this exam. So if we skip through all these eras, the Meiji era, the Showa, Taisho, let's look at the modern times. So we look at the modern times. Ever since the 1980s, they established a new national exam called the TOEIC. Now, I'm very sure that all of you are familiar with the TOEIC exam, but perhaps our audience doesn't know. The TOEIC exam is similar to perhaps if you're familiar with TOEFL or IELTS. They are English-based examinations, but essentially this one, TOEIC, differs in that it was established in Japan in the 1980s, and the substantial difference is that it only focuses on listening and it only focuses on writing and reading. So it excludes listening and especially and most importantly, speaking. Now, this is in complete opposition to the national goals that the MEXT, I use MEXT for short, because that's what they abbreviate themselves as, the Ministry of Education. The MEXT has placed goals in increasing the average English speaker in Japan, particularly after the English boom. No, not the English boom, the economic boom. But this was essentially an English boom as well, in that they tried to increase the quality of English education, and they also try to increase the amount of communication training, because that is something that has been quite lacking in Japan. So due to this lack of communication training, now let me get to the point first. Communication training exists in schools, in the public sector, but it is so disregarded and neglected due to the fact of this emphasis on national exams. The fact of the matter is, TOEIC does not test students on speaking. So the reality in opposition to the goals is that teachers, more often than not, neglect teaching their students how to speak at all. In fact, I was reading an article that illustrates how teachers feel the need to focus on teaching the students only what they need to pass the examinations for university, because they feel that this is responsible for their dual identities, the two pairs of shoes, as they put it as a metaphor, in that they wear when hoping to implement communicative methodologies, in that they want to teach their students how to speak, but in actuality the grammar translation method reigns king in the classroom at all times. This is the way students are taught English in Japan and many other countries, in fact, but particularly in Japan, for decades and decades, they focus primarily on the grammar translation method, in that they take sentences in Japan, in English, from the textbooks, and they translate them. This is essentially how they learn, but they do not use these in their speech. So essentially, there are many times where we have spoken to Japanese students who are learning English. I'm sure you have experienced this.
Mm-hmm.
I'm sure you've experienced this, but when you've been speaking to a Japanese student who's been learning English and he's on a relatively low level, there are times when you say something and they don't exactly understand you, but when you write it on a piece of paper, they suddenly understand you. Has that happened to you before?
Kind of.
I've never asked someone to write an English word for me, so no, that never happened
Well,
to me.
Well, I work in
Yeah.
the English Plaza and on the peer assistant program, and when I help the Japanese students with their homework, sometimes I have to write something on the paper to them rather than speaking, and they got it better when I write it to them. So yeah.
Mhm.
As well, when they read posters or flyers, I have the feeling that they understand it much easier than compared to when I would talk to them and explain them what it's about. So they rather read it than actually trying to listen to me or speaking to me. They just read it.
Exactly. So that is the fundamental issue that Japanese English education continues to face to this day, in that they focus primarily and specifically on the grammar translation, or in Japanese they know it as yakudoku. So yakudoku is basically what English education is about.
Mm-hmm. So, but English is a mandatory subject. No one can choose if they want to learn a different language or if they don't want to study a language at all. It is mandatory for every Japanese student to take English.
Now, that is a very complicated question to answer, because the fact of the matter is the MEXT has been working on evolving the system for years and years. Every single year you see policy revisions and amendments on English education, as well as other aspects of the education system, all the time. When was it that the weekend, the second day of the weekend, was added to the Japanese Japanese education system? It was quite recent, I think.
It was recent, but I actually forgot the date.
Yeah. But essentially, when looked at it, before 2011, there was no unified English system in the public sector, in public schools. The fact of the matter is, the MEXT, as I said, continued to push for policies and new amendments year by year, especially after the economic boom. So what happened was, in 1998, they had a new implementation, a new policy called the Sogo Teki Nagakushu. This essentially means integrated learning class. But what it was, the goal of this Sogo Teki Nagakushu period in the school time was that it was used, it was implemented in reaction to teachers feeling that Japanese students lack creativity and initiative, so they wanted to use that period in order to find new ways to add and to make activities for those students. But the fact of the matter is, due to the lack of the unified system in English education, many public schools used this Sogo Teki Nagakushu period of time to teach students. So what you saw during this time was that many schools varied in array of times of education. So some schools would have perhaps 2 to 3 hours a week, while others would have simply 45 minutes. But now, ever since 2011, the education ministry has essentially made a plan where they made it mandatory, compulsory, for English education to start from the fifth grade. And in fact, this has been the strategy that the MEXT has been using to combat the issue of low English, average speaking English people for years. Starting with seeing in 2011 when they made compulsory fifth education, and now as we go up to the 2020 Olympics, they are looking to pursue this approach more aggressively. And they're adding the fact that they're actually pursuing to add third grade compulsory education. So they're trying to push for students to start learning English from the third grade.
So
onwards.
basically saying,
But
This-
they're not
yeah.
trying to change how the content is being taught, correct?
Exactly. So they are trying to push for more
Mhm.
communication training in the classroom. But the fact of the matter is, it does not bode well with the existing structural issues, in that the focus on yakudoku, the focus on examinations, national examinations, and how they neglect the TOEIC. The TOEIC is a very
Mhm.
important exam in Japan, as it gives prospective students an edge
Mhm.
over the rest of the competition, because when they pass this exam, it shows that they are supposed to be able to understand English, but in reality they actually do not. But this exam continues to be the main emphasized national exam in the country. Many companies look for TOEIC passers in comparison to other national exams in different countries, such as IELTS and TOEFL. Jess, I think you're interested in working in Japan. I think you would have to take the TOEIC exam if I'm not mistaken.
He's a native speaker though.
Well, actually, it's kind of interesting because there's another national English exam in Japan. It's called the Eiken.
Yes.
And that was the exam that my family told me to take, because if I pass that exam, then it's basically undeniable proof that I am a native speaker, or a fluent speaker. So I mean, I took the exam, and I'm not sure if it's the same way as the TOEIC was being taught, but it did focus a lot on mostly reading and writing. And then when you pass the reading and writing section, that's when you do the speaking section, where basically you have to talk about one topic given to you by the administrators for 2 minutes. Yeah, that was how the test was run. I'm not sure if the Eiken and the TOEIC are both equally emphasized, or the importance is emphasized equally or not, but I don't know, maybe which one is more important than the other. Do you know about the Eiken, Buzz?
Not. I haven't actually focused on that. Because the main most popular one is TOEIC, as you know. Even the students in our university take all practice for TOEIC. Speaking of which, I made a mistake. The sections in the TOEIC exam are actually reading and listening, not reading and writing. I'm sorry about that. Yeah, and it's quite ironic that they have these are the only sections and they exclude the others, particularly because on their own website it is stated that the exam is the global standard for English communication skill
so wait, so
assessment.
basically the solution
Besides,
of
yeah.
it is just basically to have English education earlier than before it, or is there any other solution from the MEXT to like?
Yeah, they've been approaching the issue in that regard, but the fact of the matter is that the issues rely in the structure of the education system. If they do not revise this structure and try to improve upon the issues, then they're not going to be able to fix those issues. That's the public sector. The private sector consists of places called eikaiwa schools. I'm sure you guys are familiar with eikaiwa. They're basically English-speaking schools, or they also have English-speaking cafes, eikaiwa cafe. But it is not unheard of to see most Japanese parents taking their kids to school public school, and also letting them join juku in order to study for English as well.
Hmm.
So
Well, wait.
Yeah.
Let me ask about the public sector. Who are the educators in English? Usually.
all right, so the educators, that's another issue. So the educators are mainly Japanese teachers who have had experience studying abroad
Okay.
or have passed a certain exam. Now,
Mhm.
the problem with that is that due to the emphasis on
Mm.
the yakudoku style learning,
Mhm.
the problem with that is that the grammar translation method, the problem with that is that it reduces the bar for teachers to be able to pass the requirements
Mhm.
to teach English in the classroom,
Mm.
because this restricts them to only the vocabulary, only the grammar in the textbooks used in the classroom. As they do not practice speaking, they specifically look at sentences that have been prescribed in the book for years and years, in these same books that they use.
Mm.
So, as research suggests, most of these teachers are not in fact qualified to even teach English. In fact, it's mostly on the basis of memorization of what is in these textbooks.
Mhm.
That's why their pronunciation is not that.
Yeah.
But wait, wouldn't that kind of, I don't know. I get this feeling that if you don't really learn the language from a person who's a native speaker, doesn't that kind of hinder the motivation of the students, especially if maybe the knowledge and the skill that the teacher holds is not really adequate enough to teach. So maybe possibly they
Mhm.
could be teaching kind of the wrong information to the
Yeah.
students.
So I read about to elaborate on the teachers in the system. So in elementary and high school, you have those Japanese teachers that I explained about, and you also have, on top of that, you have something called the JET program.
Mhm.
And the JET program was made at the same time in the 1980s as TOEIC in an effort to bring to increase English speaking average, obviously. But what it does is that it brings many teachers, foreign teachers from abroad, and they bring them to the classroom as ALTs, which stands for Assistant Language Teachers. So they are in fact not the main teacher in the classroom setting. They are the assistant teachers. And the reality is that they do not have much say on how the classroom is taught. They do not have the say to suggest textbooks or ways of learning. They just try to help the teacher. That is essentially what it's all about.
Mhm.
Do they help with pronunciation or vocabularies or something like that, or like just organizational things?
Of course, that is the case. But
Okay.
the problem is that due to we come back to the national exam emphasis again. Because of this, teachers tend to neglect most of the communication training segments of their textbooks. Yeah.
So I guess Japan still has a lot of steps to take.
Oh, definitely. Even in the private sectors, these private sectors, the Eikaiwa schools, are found all over the country. I'm sure you are familiar with some of the most popular, being Aeon
Yeah.
and
Yeah,
ECC. These are and the Eikaiwa industry is it's in fact notorious for having incompetent management, and many, in fact, a majority of these Eikaiwa schools have shut down in the face of bankruptcy. The only ones that continue to survive are primarily Aeon and ECC, and even those are known to have incompetent management. So, for lack of a better word, the English education system in Japan needs improvement.
I totally agree.
Okay, that's a great topic.
Me too.
Let's move on to Bastian.
My topic.
Yeah.
Right, guys.
Yeah.
Well, thank you very much, guys, for your topics. My topic is basically about the Kikoku Shijo and the two identities. And in order to understand the topic, Kikoku Shijo are Japanese people who have been living abroad or had been living abroad for, let's say, 3 years because of their jobs, and they came back to Japan. Now, I'm focusing on the children of the Kikoku Shijo because the children of Kikoku Shijo face many difficulties in school. For example, because of their different education abroad, which they most of the time have, like Western education, they're being bullied because of their language ability, because their Japanese suffers, for example, under the problem that they have to speak in English or, let's say, French, or whatever the country they live in. They have to speak a different language, or they don't understand the culture so well, the Japanese culture. Let it be that they can't read like kuki ga yomenai. That's like basically they can't read the air. So they are more, for example, they're more straightforward than the Japanese people. They say they tell the opinion. They are very opinionated. They want to interact in the class, and because of that,
I think the term opinionated is a little bit harsh.
Oh well, it's a little bit harsh, yeah, true. But they have different opinions. That's what I wanted to say, and
yeah.
They're basically bullied by their class. Not all of them, but a lot of them are bullied by their classmates, and that's basically what Kikoku Shijo are. But my focus is
in what way?
What do you mean? What way? How they're
are
bullied?
They bullied?
Oh,
Yeah.
they're bullied basically by physical and mental bullying. So physical, you can imagine they hit. They are. I don't know how far I should go with that, but physical abuse happens, as well as mentally, of course, when they're ostracized from a group of people because they can't join, for example, club activity, or they are in a club and they're with their club members and they, for example, act weird for a Japanese person because they still look Japanese, right? Then they are basically ostracized and kicked out of the club or whatsoever. But that's not my focus. My focus is rather how they are able to handle their two identities. So they have basically their Japanese identity and they have their foreign identity. And I connect that with Erwin Goffman's Dramaturgy. I think you guys have heard of that if you've taken sociology class or social psychology classes. Dramaturgy is, as I said, introduced by Erwin Goffman. And the idea of it is basically describable in three main terms. The first one is the front stage, the second one is the backstage, and the third one is the working consensus. Now, you can imagine it as like a theater. People are playing roles. That's the basic idea. The front stage is basically when the actor, for example, acts his role, and this role is basically seen by the audience, and the audience is able to judge his or her role. But there's also a backstage where basically the actor has his own opinions or his own character, because he's just acting a character, right? He has his own character, and those kind of things are not shown to the audience, right? The audience can't read his mind. The audience can't see his personal character or like his own personality. They can only see what they see on the front stage, what he's basically acting. And then there's the working consensus. The working consensus is basically the environment the audience, so the observers, and as well the actors in. Both have to understand that their position, basically in the environment, and they have to understand the environment like a theater in order to interpret it correctly and describe it correctly. So, for example, if you're in a coffee shop, for example, the barista knows that you want to have a beverage, for example, and the customer knows that you went to a coffee shop in order to get a coffee. It's not that you went to a coffee shop in order to order, I don't know, beer or something, even though they might have beer, but you would rather go to a beer garden. So that's how it kind of like works with the environment. Yeah, yes, I know my
German.
Your German
side
yeah.
is showing. Yeah. So that's basically what I'm trying to connect, and I'm basically arguing that because of this dramaturgy, they're able to handle the Japanese and their foreign identity. And I use 4 main sources. The first source is by Sugimoto Yoshio, An Introduction to Japanese Society. You guys know that book. I also use a book by Mary White from 1992, The Japanese Overseas, Can They Go Home Again? And as well another interesting book from Yasuko Kano from 2003, Negotiating Bilingual and Bicultural Identities. Those are my three main sources, basically, which I use. Because they're talking about identity and what kind of problems the Kikoku Shijo face.
Well, I want to ask you, so do you think that there's a difference between how foreign students are treated and how Kikoku Shijo students are treated?
Yes, I think there is a difference. And the difference is basically going back to what Sugimoto describes in his book of what it means to be Japanese, basically. What are the criteria for being Japanese? And he mainly summarized them in 7 criteria. That's first the Japanese nationality, which the Kikoku Shijo have. The foreigners, they don't have that. The ethnic lineage, which also the Kikoku Shijo have, but not the foreigners. For example, the place of birth, which is for Kikoku Shijo in Japan, and the current residence. So now Kikoku Shijo came basically back to Japan, so they have their residency. And there are another 2 factors which are basically depending on these other 5 factors, and that's the cultural literacy and the subjective identity. The cultural literacy basically means is if they understand the culture they live in. And the subjective identity is how they see themselves. So what their identity is. Do they see themselves as Japanese or do they see themselves as foreigners? Now, to go back a little bit, as I said, their language proficiency is kind of suffering in general from the time abroad. Now, when they go abroad, their parents are very aware of the fact that they will return to Japan. So now they know, okay, we have to still educate him in a Japanese way. So therefore, they sometimes send him on a Japanese school for the weekend. But most of the Kikoku Shijo are on a normal high school, middle school, primary school, from the like the Western style education system. So they speak a different language, they are in a different culture, and they're basically taught differently, a different language, and they start to use a different language. So their proficiency when they come back, they can still speak, but what mainly the problem is of course kanji, which are the Japanese characters. They suffer that they can't, read them properly, and as well, then the Japanese culture, because they have the foreign influence. Now, the Kikoku Shijo are able to regain their language proficiency after joining a lot of re-entering classes. So most of the time, high schools or middle schools, for example, they offer reintegration classes for Kikoku Shijo. Those are like special Kikoku Shijo classes just for them to be reintegrated into the culture and into the language. And also, of course, they join normal jukus, for example, or extra Japanese lessons in order to catch up with their classmates, because most of them are very eager to, be part of the society because they don't want to be alone. However, they struggle, of course, because they're either bullied or they don't want to accept their Japanese identity. And Japanese culture-wise, of course, which is also related maybe to the language proficiency, is keigo. Keigo is, of course, the polite form of Japanese. And it's not only a language factor, it's also a cultural factor. Because when you talk to your senpai or your teacher or to any other, let's say an elderly person, you have to speak in a polite manner. You can't just be casual. And many Kikoku Shijo lost that ability to basically identify if they can speak casually or like in a politely to that person in front of them. They also have the problem cultural wise that they are, as I said earlier, they are more foreigner, so they act more foreign. For example, in a club they would point out, hey, this is not how it works and I don't want to do this, or they would use, for example, English words in a Japanese sentence, and their identity is kind of their mixed, right? And their club members have the problem that they can't accept the Western side because they look Japanese, they have the Japanese residence, they are basically Japanese, but they can't speak or act in a Japanese manner. Now, to come to the point, Kikoku Shijo are in the end able to be Japanese and to be foreign not at the same time, but separately. Now, they come to this conclusion that they are both, they most of the time, over, let's say, depends on the Kikushijo, over a 10 years of period, or like a long period, they're able to handle both identities and they accept both identities. They see themselves as American, Canadian, or whatsoever, and they see themselves as Japanese. Now, and now that's the point. What I argue is, I say that they are not able to create a new identity where they basically accept the foreign and the Japanese identities. I'm saying that depending on the situation, the location, and the people they're with, they act either foreign or Japanese. So when they're with Japanese, only their Japanese identity is showing. So they act Japanese in the front stage, and the backstage they might think that, you know, other opinions, foreign opinions, but also Japanese opinions, because of course that's kind of like, in that case it's emerged. And of course the working consensus, the location they're in Japan, they're with their Japanese friends, family members or whatsoever. So they know both that they have to act Japanese, and their peers around them, the people around them, you know, they are in the same environment, so they assume that that person, that Kikushijo, would act Japanese as well. Now, on the other hand, when they are with a foreigner, they would of course act the foreign way. They wouldn't act Japanese. They would, in the front stage, act foreign. They would, in the backstage, would have their foreign identity or their Japanese identity, and which they probably try to show because Western cultures are more outgoing. And then the environment is of course the same. You know, where you're with the foreign peers, both of them, you know, the foreign peers accept you not to be Japanese, and you think, okay, that I can't act Japanese, I have to act foreign. And that's how they handle it with this dramaturgy idea of Irving Goffman. That's what I basically argue in my paper.
Have you met any Kikokushijos before?
Mm-hmm.
I've met Kikokushijo before, yes. I have actually some friends who are Kikokushijo. For one friend from Fukuoka, she is an elderly woman. Unfortunately, is not a child, or like children, what I'm more focusing on in my paper.
Mm-hmm.
But she has been living abroad in Germany, and she can speak German. And when she came back, now she didn't face problems. And that's exactly the point why I focused on children. Parents, when they go abroad, they have been living in Japan, let's say, for 30 years.
And of course they're fluent with the language and everything.
Exactly. They're well established in the culture. They're well established in the culture. They know how it works. And even though if they go abroad, when they come back, they can perfectly snap back into it and act the Japanese way. They are established. However, the children, on the other hand, they have to be socialized, right? They have to go through middle school and high school and even primary school to become Japanese, to understand the system. And therefore, this part of middle school, or like of their school education, is immensely important for their Japanese identity. And they're taken out of that and are put in a different environment in a foreign country, and therefore they are struggling more than their parents. So I personally haven't met any young Kikokushijo, like a teenager or a child, but I have met parents and older people, middle-aged people who've changed, but they still are very Japanese when it comes to conversations, culture, identity.
To what extent do you cover the concept of Sugimoto's Nihonjin Ron in your paper?
You mean how they're Japanese? I covered... I would say that's one of my main points, because I first have to explain...
Yeah, because you summarized it, but obviously it's a much more complex subject when it comes down to it. So I have a feeling that the audience may be a little bit confused on the concept.
Yeah, so what Sugimoto basically discussed are these 7 points. And you have to understand it this way. You can be a person who takes all the 7 criteria to... and say, okay, only if you fulfill those 7 criteria, you are a Japanese. if you don't fulfill one of the criteria, critics, you won't be able to be a Japanese. If you can be also an exclusionist, which basically argues that only, let's say, 3 of those criteria are important. So when you fulfill those 3 criteria, you can be a Japanese. If you don't fulfill one of these criteria, you can not become a Japanese. So, and then you can also take, of course, the middle ground and be like, okay, I think you're not fulfilling this criteria, but you're fulfilling this criteria of the 7. Well, then you can be a Japanese, you know. So it really depends. It goes down on how many criteria you want to use to describe what a Japanese person is. And I argue all 7 points of them, but I mainly focus on the culture and the language proficiency, because the nationality, the ethnic lineage, the place of birth, and the current residence are all Japanese. So I can't really focus on these 4 points because they are all basic. That means if I would only focus on those 4 points, 5 points, 4 points, 4 points, then you would be a Japanese, right? But I can't do that because then, of course, a Kikokushijo would be easily a Japanese. So there's much more to that. There's the cultural literacy and the subjective identity. And he as well, he has a table of content and he placed by everything, even by a Japanese who has been living for his whole life in Japan, a question mark to cultural literacy and subjective identity. Because it just depends on how you are integrated into society. And as we know, there are, of course, people who are disabled here in Japan, people who are mentally ill, people who are having different ethnic lineage, but, you know, they're still Japanese because they're born here and raised here. So it's very difficult to figure out if they have this cultural literacy and the subjective identity or not. It really goes down to what you include in your description and what not. Yeah. But like, yeah, in the conclusion, basically all the Kikokushijo, for example, especially like her name was Kano, she interviewed, her whole book is basically interviews from Kikokushijo. So she interviewed them, described their lives, and all of them kind of accepted both of their identities, and which I use as a basis for my dramaturgy, that they're able to do that through the dramaturgy. But yeah, in the end, if you just go back to the Japaneseness, if they're Japanese or not, I think they are Japanese. I personally think they are fully Japanese and they're fully aware that they have a different identity. And yeah, so they're basically Japanese.
It's such a unique complex to Japan in that the population in Japan is so homogeneous that this sort of issue can only happen in a place as homogeneous as Japan.
Well, exactly. Yeah.
You know what I mean?
Exactly.
Yeah.
Because
and considering our globalized world becoming more and more internationalized, living in Japan is such an interesting experience. just seeing how we are the minority, the extreme minority, and there's 99% population of Japanese. It's such an interesting thing to see.
Well, if you see it that way, we foreigners, we basically can never become real Japanese, except if you only would accept maybe the residence or the Japanese ability, because there are many foreigners who can speak very fluently Japanese, but we probably can never become Japanese, even if you want to. But yeah, sums it up very well.
All right, yeah, sounds like a really interesting topic, and the rest of you guys, looks like you all worked really hard, huh?
Yeah.
So I know I did. How
we have an
how
hour
far are
and
we
9
into this right
minutes,
now?
48 seconds.
That sounds like a good time.
I see. So we've got quite an extended episode this time around, huh? Is this our last episode for this season?
No.
Hopefully we'll have another episode coming up in the next week after this has been aired, and after that we're looking forward to taking the rest of our summer holiday vacation, and so we come back to give you a season 2, a second season, where we truly want to up the ante and bring you something that's truly special. We're gonna be working hard in our summer holidays to bring you that. But for now, please enjoy. I hope you enjoyed this episode with us, our 4th episode, and look forward to the next episode coming up. What's it gonna be about, guys?
Oh, secret.
All right. Well, yeah. We'll end it here. Thank you very much if you've stuck around up to this point. Sorry if we've taken up an extended amount of time, but this is the nature of podcasts. It's in-depth. So we'll end this right here. Thank you very much for listening to us. Please give us a like on our Facebook page, /Bento Bureau, if you haven't already. Thank you very much for the support, and have a great summer catching Pokemon. Let's do this, guys.
Let's do this.
1.
ごちそうさまでした。ごちそうさまでした。Been away from Japan too long.
ごちそうさまでした。
Oh yeah,ごちそうさまでした。
ごちそうさまでした。
Bye.
Thanks, guys.